Over a period of 40 years or so, I have used a number of videotape machines to do television history research, such as to see credit information. My most recent main machine has been a Sony SLV-585HF, a rugged machine. But it went goofy recently, so I went looking for other such machines from sellers on eBay in September 2024. It was back in the 1980s when I began to use videotape machines, and this machine is one of the first. I had two such units years ago. This machine is called a Panasonic PV-4020. Here is the inside of an SLV-585HF machine, the top side, one of 5 that I then had in late September 2024. Of 4 bought some days earlier, 3 had been described as working and tested, and 1 had been called reconditioned, and when the reconditioned machine was looked over, it worked well. 3 of the machines had the same broken gear, a bluish gear, and 1 may have gotten bad in the mails, since the cardboard box was damaged and the case had a big dent. This is the underside of an SLV-585HF that is going to have a gear repaired. I show it because the panel has to be removed to get to the problem with the machine, and that problem is a broken gear related to setting the tape in place on the head drum. The panel can be removed once 7 screws are off the machine. Here the bottom panel is removed. The upper left corner is where work will be done. The electronics board has to be removed, and it is removed after 5 screws are taken out and 4 electronic connections are removed, one of which goes to a tiny motor. Here you can see a gear area, and this gear area is related to pulling the tape from the cassette to the head drum. Notice the broken blue gear. I would discover my original machine had a partially broken gear, which I would repair without adding any glue to it. This video is not designed to show all the steps in removing the gears shown in the previous image and returning the gears to the proper positions. Teaching videos exist on YouTube to show you how to put pieces in place properly. You are seeing an image from one such video. Here is an image from another video on YouTube. At this point you can see the blue gear has been repaired, only glued together. I expect the gear will break soon because it does not have a reinforcing piece like that which you will soon learn about in this video. Here is the broken gear from my machine, and it is resting on a cheaply made jig that I made. The jig has a hole in it for the axle of the gear and a slot for a tab on the gear. This setup is designed to help me glue the gear together, and it helps set the proper plane of the gear. I used a Loctite product to glue the gear together, and it is shown here. This Plastics Bond product is not strong enough to use without my reinforcing piece. In fact, I did a test with the gear when it was only glued. The gear normally has a spring installed when used. When I went to put a spring in place on my first experiment to fix a blue gear problem, the spring popped the glued gear apart. The glue is only to get the gear in the proper shape. After the gear had set for a day or about 24 hours, I made another jig. I used auto body filler or Bondo. I put a blob of the material on a board, and then put down clear wrap material on the blob, and then I pushed the glued gear into the blob. This jig will be used to hold the glued gear while I work to put a reinforcing piece in place on the gear. Here's an image that shows 2 glued gears, and it shows 3 5/8 inside diameter retaining rings or retaining clips. The clips are like springs that press inward, and in this photograph you can see jig number 1. Remember, I am in the long run repairing the same gear on 4 tape machines, one machine of which will show a defect in the video section once I return the gear to the machine. Each clip has to be cut down at one end, and each ring has to have the other end filed till it is thinner. Here is a look at jig number 2, the gear set in place, and a clip. The clip is the original adjusted design. Once the gear with this example of a clip was put in the machine, I looked over what I had in the machine. I then removed the gear and slimmed down the width of the end with the hole with a cutting wheel on a Dremel tool. I show now a reworked retaining clip and an original clip. Only one end of the original clip gets cut so that when it is installed on the gear, there is an open area for one end of the spring that gets installed in the gear. The other end of the clip gets filed thinner. Also, each clip gets the oval-like back end thinned through filing. Here's an image that shows a clip on a glued gear. You really do need to use a jig like that shown. You sort of have to drive the clip onto the gear and drive it all the way down. For example, you might use a small flat blade screwdriver to push the ring on the gear, and you might even use a screwdriver or a small punch with a lightweight hammer to drive the clip onto the gear. If you do not use a jig, you could break the gear apart. Oh, notice the spring at the right. This image shows how the spring is placed in the gear before the metal arm is attached. And here is the finished product. Sony engineers should have had a clip on this type of gear from the beginning. So they had a design flaw. This gear is used on a Sony SLV-585HF, but a similar gear is used in other machines from Sony, such as the SLV-595HF. This is how the repaired gear fits in the videotape machine. I now have several working Sony SLV-585HF tape machines, so I am back in business and then some. And you have an idea how to repair a plastic gear, and that is the end of that.